The year 2050 began just like any other, with humans going about their daily lives. But that all changed one fateful day when the skies above our cities flickered with strange lights, followed by a deep, resonating hum. It was the first sign that we were not alone in the universe. At first, we thought it was a natural phenomenon, perhaps an asteroid or a comet, but as the days passed, the truth became clear. The aliens were here. I remember sitting in my apartment, watching the news when the announcement came unidentified ships have entered Earth's atmosphere. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The world was in chaos. Governments scrambled to formulate a response, but deep down, I knew we were facing something far beyond our current capabilities. The year 2050 started with the usual pace of life. People were bustling through their daily routines, unaware that everything was about to change. I had just finished my morning coffee and was settling into my work when the first reports began coming in. It started as a whisper, an unusual disturbance in the sky, something strange in the heavens. At first, it was dismissed as a weather anomaly or some kind of satellite malfunction. But then, the strange lights appeared. Bright, unnatural, and pulsating, they flickered across the globe, seen by millions. At first, we thought it was a hoax, maybe a new experimental technology from some other country or a meteor shower. But as the days went on, the reports became more frequent, and the lights grew stronger, more organized. Governments around the world scrambled to provide explanations. Military agencies were put on high alert, and communication networks buzzed with anxious speculation. A few days later, the truth could no longer be ignored. It came suddenly, without warning. We watched in horror as massive ships, beyond anything we had ever seen, entered Earth's atmosphere. They didn't land in any one specific place. They hovered in the sky, silent and terrifying, casting huge shadows over cities. The world fell silent for a moment, and then chaos erupted. I'll never forget the panic in the streets, the screams, the sirens. People didn't know where to go, what to do. The realization hit hard we were not alone. It didn't take long for the first contact with the aliens to occur. They didn't communicate with us directly, but their ships emitted strange signals like a humming vibration that filled the air. They didn't ask for our cooperation, nor did they seem to care about diplomacy. Their ships were equipped with technology that far surpassed anything we had on Earth. Satellites, which we had always used to observe the stars and study space, were now useless. They were obliterated in seconds, taken down by a technology we couldn't even begin to understand. I remember watching the news that day. As the first military forces tried to engage the alien ships, they launched everything we had: missiles, fighter jets, even experimental weapons. But it was like throwing pebbles at a moving mountain. The aliens didn't seem to be in a hurry. They hovered, observing, waiting. And then, when the time came, they struck. The attack wasn't like anything we could have imagined. Their ships, with their impenetrable shields, released powerful energy beams that disintegrated everything in their path. Buildings, military bases, even entire cities crumbled before the raw power of the alien technology. The world watched in horror as Earth's mightiest defenses were wiped away in minutes. It was clear now humanity was powerless. In those first hours, panic spread. People fled to shelters, praying for survival, but even the most secure bunkers weren't enough. Governments declared martial law, but it didn't matter. We were all in the same position, helpless, uncertain, and alone. I was no different. As part of the communication team, I was tasked with helping maintain some order during the chaos, coordinating between governments and trying to keep civilians informed. But there was little to say. There were no solutions, no answers, just the terrifying unknown. And yet, in the face of this overwhelming threat, something strange happened. People didn't crumble. Despite the panic, despite the fear, humanity began to come together. We were scared, yes, but we were also determined. The unity that followed the initial shock was something extraordinary. In that moment of fear, we remembered what it meant to be human, to fight for survival, to stand together, even when the odds were impossible. But the question lingered in the back of my mind: could we really survive this? Could humanity defend itself against an alien force so far beyond our understanding? The first wave of the invasion was brutal. What followed was even worse. The alien ships didn't just land, they took control. In the days that followed, the world's major cities became nothing more than husks, abandoned and burning. The first attack came without warning, a flash of light brighter than anything we had ever seen, and then the devastation. Entire cities were reduced to rubble in seconds. No warnings, no ultimatums, just the cold, merciless strike of an advanced technology we could never have imagined. I remember the sound of the air vibrating, as if the atmosphere itself was being torn apart. And then came the silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your chest. We sat there glued to our screens, watching as the news showed us the remains of what once were the world's most thriving cities. The aliens didn't even need to send ground forces, there was no need. Their ships were powerful enough to level any defense we could muster. It wasn't a war, it was an annihilation. The attacks were precise, systematic. The cities were targeted one by one, and in a matter of hours they were gone. Beijing, New York, Paris, each of these cities, symbols of human achievement, fell to the alien invaders. Our most powerful military forces launched every weapon in their arsenal: nuclear missiles, airstrikes, laser-guided bombs, but nothing touched the alien ships. They were shielded by some kind of energy barrier, impervious to our weapons. The more we attacked, the more hopeless it seemed. The more desperate we became. The world's leaders met in emergency summits, but nothing could stop the alien advance. Countries fell into disarray as governments crumbled under the pressure. People turned on each other, fighting for food, water, and safety. But none of it mattered. It was clear that the aliens had no intention of negotiating. Earth wasn't a colony they were seeking to conquer, it was a planet they were eradicating. They seemed to view us as nothing more than pests, insignificant life forms unworthy of existence. In the chaos, the military tried to mount some kind of organized resistance. What few cities remained, like London, Sydney, and Tokyo, were fortified and defended with whatever technology we had left. People made desperate attempts to fight back, but it was futile. The aliens had weapons we couldn't even begin to comprehend. Their ships could fly faster than anything we had ever built, and their energy weapons were capable of destroying anything in their path. What were we supposed to do? I remember talking to my colleagues in the communication team as we tried to keep some semblance of order. But there was no order left. The world had descended into madness. The enemy had no rules, they didn't follow the conventions of war. There was no chance for diplomacy, no chance to negotiate. It was a fight for survival, and humanity was losing. As the alien forces continued their relentless assault, our military commanders began discussing a last-ditch plan. It was clear that there was no way to defeat the aliens using conventional means. We had to think differently, think beyond our limited technology. We needed something new, something we had never tried before. But no one had any clear ideas, only questions. Would humanity stand a chance against a force so far beyond our understanding? Could we adapt quickly enough to find a way to fight back? The more we thought about it, the more we realized the truth: we were fighting not just for survival, but for the very future of our species. And that future was looking grim. As the weeks dragged on, something unexpected began to stir within humanity. The initial shock of the invasion had left us in a state of chaos, but the longer we resisted, the more we began to realize that we could not allow ourselves to succumb to despair. Amid the panic and destruction, people began to find a way forward. There was a sense of unity, a spark of determination that spread across the globe. It wasn't much, but it was something we had never truly seen on this scale before. The world's governments, now fractured and weakened, had to set aside old rivalries. Nations that had once stood apart from each other, separated by borders and ideologies, now began to come together. The alien threat was too great to be fought alone. The United States, Russia, China, the European Union, every major power set aside their differences and pooled their resources. The united effort wasn't perfect, but it was the first step in an alliance born from necessity. In the beginning, there was a lot of uncertainty. No one knew what we were facing. The aliens had technology that made our weapons look like toys, and every attempt to strike back seemed futile. But the realization came slowly. This wasn't just about military might. This was about more than just launching missiles and airstrikes. We needed to think differently, to harness the one thing that had always made us unique: our adaptability. Humanity had faced crises before. Wars, natural disasters, disease outbreaks. We had always found a way to survive. And now, with everything on the line, we needed to find a way to survive again. It was in the darkest moments that we began to come together. Engineers, scientists, and military leaders from all over the world began to exchange ideas. We didn't have the technology to match the aliens, but we did have our minds. We had to get creative. We had to innovate. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source: the global communication networks. We had been in constant contact with each other, sharing information, passing along observations from the few remaining military units that had managed to survive the initial wave. As we shared data, we started to notice a pattern. The alien ships, though far superior in their weaponry and shielding, seemed to rely on a certain type of energy. This energy, whatever it was crucial to their technology. It was the key to everything. We didn't know exactly how it worked, but we knew it was something we could exploit. Scientists and engineers from every corner of the world, ranging from those in hidden bunkers to the few remaining labs, began working together to understand this energy source. It wasn't long before we came up with a theory. What if we could disrupt their energy field? What if we could create a weapon that would interfere with their technology, just enough to give us a fighting chance? The first test was nothing more than a crude prototype, a small device that emitted a frequency designed to interfere with the alien shields. It was a gamble, but we had to try. I was part of the communications team during this phase, helping to coordinate the information, tracking each development. When the device was finally ready, it was launched in a coordinated attack. It wasn't a large-scale battle. It wasn't a miracle. But for the first time since the invasion began, we struck a blow. We saw one of their ships, for the first time, flickering, its shields malfunctioning. We hadn't destroyed it, but we had done something no one thought was possible. We had disrupted their technology. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. It meant that we weren't completely helpless. It meant that we could fight back. And it gave us hope. As news of the success spread, the global resistance grew stronger. More countries contributed to the cause, bringing in whatever resources they could spare. The sense of unity that had once seemed so far-fetched became a reality. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked side by side, sharing their knowledge, their skills. And we began to realize something even more important: we were stronger together. If we could combine our knowledge, our creativity, and our resources, we could build a force strong enough to challenge the invaders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in that start, there was hope. Hope that humanity could endure. Hope that we could find a way to survive, no matter the odds. We were far from victory, but for the first time in weeks, we had a reason to believe. As the days passed, the unity that had begun to form around the world continued to grow. The initial hope sparked by the disruption of the alien ship's shields turned into a full-fledged rallying cry. Governments, once paralyzed by fear, now found themselves working with unprecedented urgency. Scientists, engineers, and military experts who had been scattered across the globe gathered into international task forces. And despite the devastation, the human spirit seemed unbreakable. We were a species on the brink of extinction, but we were determined to fight. The most critical development was the decision to focus on weaponizing the technology that had allowed us to disrupt the alien shields. The early prototypes had shown promise, but we knew we had only scratched the surface. A team of engineers and scientists from various nations, working day and night, began to refine the energy disruption devices. They worked in secret labs, hidden from the aliens' prying sensors, with minimal resources. Yet somehow they made progress. The key breakthrough came when we discovered that the aliens' energy fields weren't just defensive, they were interconnected with their offensive systems as well. If we could disable or interrupt the field for long enough, it might not only disarm their shields but also destabilize their energy weapons. It was risky, and no one could guarantee success, but we had no other choice. The first full-scale attempt to use the weapon was a gamble, but we needed to test it. The plan was set in motion. We would launch an attack against one of their remaining ships in orbit. I remember the night before the mission. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Everyone knew what was at stake, but we also understood that failure would mean one less opportunity to strike back. I stood alongside the team in the command center, watching as final checks were made on the weapon. The hum of computers and the soft murmur of operators filled the room. It was like a heartbeat, synchronized in fear and hope. The countdown began. The launch took place under the cover of darkness, a joint operation involving several military factions. Missiles carrying the energy disruption devices were launched from multiple locations around the world. The aliens didn't seem to notice at first. Their ships hovered above Earth, scanning the remaining population centers, seemingly indifferent to the attack we were preparing. But as the missiles got closer, the ship's shields began to flicker just as we had hoped. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We saw the shields flicker and fade, like the dimming of a light bulb, and then, the blast. The missile struck the ship, sending a shockwave through the atmosphere. The explosion was enormous, lighting up the night sky like a star being born. For a moment, everything was still. And then, as the smoke and debris settled, we saw the alien ship crippled and tumbling toward Earth. The euphoria was indescribable. It was as if the impossible had been achieved. We had just destroyed one of their ships, a weapon of unimaginable power. The world erupted in celebration. People poured into the streets, cheering, crying, embracing. It wasn't the end of the war, but it was a turning point. We had struck back, and the message was clear: we would not go down without a fight. But even as the victory sank in, we knew the reality: the aliens would not take this loss lightly. The world's leaders were quick to call for calm. There was no time for celebration. This was just the beginning. The aliens would retaliate, and we had to be ready. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, we believed we could win. In the days that followed, humanity's resolve hardened. There was a new sense of purpose, a new understanding that our survival depended on our collective strength. We knew the alien forces would regroup, adapt, and launch a counterattack. But now we had hope, and with hope came determination. We were no longer fighting to just survive, we were fighting to win. The struggle was just beginning, but we were no longer outmatched. Now we had a chance. The days following our victory were both exhilarating and terrifying. While the destruction of the alien ship had given us hope, it also made us painfully aware of the dangers that lay ahead. The aliens had not been defeated, merely delayed. We were still a fragile species, hanging on by a thread, and we knew that they would retaliate with everything they had. Their invasion was not an accident, nor a mistake. It was calculated. They had come to conquer, and we were standing in their way. The response from the alien forces was swift and brutal. In the days after our successful strike, their ships began to move with renewed aggression. They launched coordinated attacks on military bases, satellite stations, and any remaining communication centers. Their weapons were more precise, their tactics more brutal. It became clear that the defeat of one ship had done little to deter them. Instead, it had provoked their wrath. Despite this, we did not falter. The victory had emboldened humanity. We had fought back, and though we had lost much, we had also gained something: priceless knowledge. We now understood the alien technology better than we ever had before. The disruption device was no longer just a theoretical weapon, it was real, and we had the potential to build more of them. Our scientific community worked tirelessly to improve upon the initial design, hoping to refine the technology enough to create a true defense against the aliens' overwhelming power. The global resistance was stronger than ever, with nations collaborating more closely than we could have ever imagined in the past. The joint effort became a beacon of human perseverance. People from all walks of life joined the cause: engineers, doctors, civilians, soldiers, all working together to develop countermeasures and strategies. For the first time in history, the world had become one united force. We were no longer divided by borders or ideologies. We were humanity against an alien threat, and our unity was our greatest strength. Our military began launching smaller raids against the alien ships, using hit-and-run tactics to test the limits of their shields and weaponry. These attacks were risky and often resulted in heavy casualties, but they were necessary. Each battle provided us with more data, more insights into how the aliens operated. We learned to exploit small weaknesses in their defenses, working with the limited resources we had. But every victory, no matter how small, came at a high cost. As the conflict dragged on, the toll on human civilization became more apparent. Entire regions had been reduced to ruins. Millions of people had already been lost, and many more would follow. Cities had become war zones with civilians hiding in underground bunkers, relying on makeshift supplies and basic survival tactics. The days of comfort were long gone. The world was at war, and every person had a part to play, whether they were on the front lines or helping to develop new technologies in makeshift laboratories. And then came the second wave. It arrived in the form of a massive fleet of alien ships, far larger than any we had encountered before. They descended upon us like a storm, swarming across the skies, obliterating everything in their path. The air was thick with the sound of their weapons, and the ground shook as their ships made contact with Earth's atmosphere. We had prepared for this, but we were not ready. Their technology had advanced. They had adapted. And in the face of this new threat, humanity had no choice but to escalate the conflict. Our scientists began working on a new weapon, a device capable of disabling an entire fleet of alien ships simultaneously. The stakes had never been higher. If we failed, it would mean the end of humanity as we knew it. The world watched, holding its breath, as the new weapon was tested in secret labs. We knew the risks. If we were wrong, if the weapon failed, the retaliation would be devastating. But we had come too far to turn back. The alien threat was now a fight for survival, and we could not afford to hesitate. As the final test was prepared, I couldn't help but wonder if this was truly our last chance. Would humanity rise to the occasion, or would we fall, just as so many species before us had? The uncertainty was paralyzing, but one thing was certain: we had no other choice but to fight. Our future depended on it. The weapon was ready. After weeks of late-night work, sleepless engineers, and tense discussions, we finally had our answer. The device we had created was a game-changer if it worked as intended. It was designed to send a massive energy pulse that would interfere with the alien ship's systems on a global scale. The idea was simple but risky: hit them all at once, disrupt their power grids, and cause a massive shutdown. The theory behind it was sound, but the reality was frightening. If the weapon malfunctioned, we would lose everything. The aliens would have an opening to completely wipe us out. The countdown to launch began, and with each passing second, the pressure mounted. It wasn't just a military operation, it was the last hope for humanity. If this failed, we would be nothing more than a footnote in history. The room was filled with tension, the soft hum of computers and quiet murmurs of the command staff. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me as I watched the final stages of preparation unfold. It wasn't just the weapon that mattered, it was what it represented. This was humanity's defiance. It was our refusal to give up. The launch was set to take place in the early hours of the morning, when the alien ships would be concentrated in their most vulnerable positions. We had studied their movements, and for the first time, we were confident that we could strike them when they were most vulnerable. But confidence and fear walked hand in hand. As the clock ticked down to 0, I found myself holding my breath. When the command was given, the weapon activated. Across the globe, massive energy pulses shot into the atmosphere, directed at the alien fleet. It wasn't an immediate result. For a long moment, nothing happened. The alien ships continued to hover above our cities, their powerful weapons aimed at the earth below. There was no sign of weakness, no flicker in their shields. My heart sank. Had it failed? Were we doomed? But then, the first sign of success. A ship, then another, and then more, began to stagger. Their shields flickered and sputtered. For the first time since the invasion began, we saw the effects of the weapon. The pulse had worked. The aliens were struggling to maintain control of their technology. Their ships began to fall from the sky, one by one. We had crippled their fleet. We had done the impossible. The exhilaration was overwhelming. Our victory was not only a technical achievement, it was a moral one. Humanity had found its strength, and it was enough to shake the alien forces. For the first time, we were not the prey. We were the hunters. The battle was far from over, but this was the turning point. The momentum had shifted. The aliens had underestimated us. But as the ships fell, the retaliation came swiftly. The surviving alien vessels launched a desperate counterattack, sending waves of missiles toward the Earth. They had no choice but to escalate their response. The air was filled with explosions as their weapons struck cities and military bases. The sky was dark with the remnants of their attacks. It was clear that the aliens were not going to give up easily. They had underestimated us once, but they would not make that mistake again. We knew that the fight was far from over, but we had given ourselves a fighting chance. The destruction was devastating, but the aliens had been dealt a blow they had not expected. The battle now would be a war of attrition. We had to build on our successes and strike while they were vulnerable. Humanity's resilience had been proven, and that was something the aliens hadn't anticipated. But the war was still far from won. The struggle would continue, and the cost of victory would be high. In those dark days, as we watched the world rebuild, one thing was clear: we were not done. We were not going to give in. The aliens had thought they could take us down, but they had underestimated the heart of humanity. We would keep fighting, no matter what it took, until the skies were ours again. The battle for survival was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, I believed that we had a chance to win. The weeks following our last victory were a blur of both hope and devastation. As the alien fleet regrouped and retreated, we began to believe that humanity could actually hold its own. Our initial success had turned the tide, but the war was far from over. The aliens had adapted, their counters were swift, and they were determined to finish what they had started. We had struck a blow, but now we had to finish the fight. The cost of survival was mounting, and we had no choice but to keep pushing forward. In the aftermath of our breakthrough, the world had united in ways never seen before. Countries that had once been rivals now shared technology, military strategies, and scientific discoveries. Entire populations were mobilized, each person playing a crucial role, from soldiers on the front lines to scientists developing new technologies. Everyone had a part to play in this new global war effort. The lines between military and civilian blurred as people from all walks of life poured their energy into defending humanity's future. Despite the unity, the physical and emotional toll on Earth was undeniable. Whole cities were in ruins, and millions had already lost their lives. The planet itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see whether humanity would emerge victorious or be crushed beneath the weight of this conflict. The alien presence had become an all-consuming force on every continent. In every city, there was no escaping their reach. But as we rebuilt, there was also a growing sense of something more, something intangible, something that had been awakened in us. We were no longer simply fighting for survival. We were fighting for our future, for our children, for the legacy of humanity itself. The scientific community was working around the clock, attempting to find new ways to harness alien technology. The weapon we had used to disable their fleet was one step in the right direction, but we needed more. We needed to understand their technology, how it worked, why it was so advanced, and how we could use it against them. For months, researchers pored over alien artifacts, reverse engineering their systems, hoping to find something, anything that would give us an edge. Then, one day, it came. The breakthrough we had all been hoping for. A small team of engineers working on a captured alien warship managed to hack into their communication systems. What they discovered was a network, a vast interlinked system of alien warships and resource stations across the galaxy. It was a command center, a place from which the entire alien invasion was being controlled. The key to their strength, their power, was in this central system. If we could shut it down, we could cripple the invasion once and for all. The decision to launch a direct assault on this alien network was not made lightly. It meant risking everything. We knew that infiltrating this network would be incredibly difficult and dangerous. The aliens would have fortified it, and the defenses would be unlike anything we had faced before. But this was it. This was the last chance to end the war. The final battle began to take shape. It wasn't going to be one major strike, but a series of coordinated missions, each designed to disable parts of the alien infrastructure and disrupt their communications. The first phase was launched with a small but elite force, a team of soldiers, hackers, and engineers. They would infiltrate the alien network's command center and attempt to shut it down from within. But we knew it would take more than just one attack. The aliens launched their counteroffensive immediately. The skies darkened with the shadow of their warships, and the ground shook beneath the onslaught. This time, there were no surprises. We knew they would fight with everything they had. The world held its breath as the battle escalated. Cities, once thriving, were now battle zones. People ran for cover as explosions lit up the horizon, each one another reminder that this was no longer a war for territory, it was a war for survival. As we launched the final phase of the mission, I found myself reflecting on everything we had endured. The losses, the sacrifices, the grief. It was impossible not to wonder if it had all been worth it. But then I remembered why we were fighting. We weren't just fighting for Earth. We were fighting for the future of humanity itself. We were fighting for the chance to determine our own destiny, to ensure that our species would not be wiped out by an invader. And in that moment, as the final charge was launched, I realized that the outcome didn't matter. We had already won. We had proven that we could stand against the alien threat. We had proven that humanity would fight to the very end. The alien invaders might have been more advanced, but they had underestimated us. They had failed to recognize the strength of our resolve. With the final pulse of the weapon, the alien network shut down, and the war was over. The aliens were gone. The skies cleared, the silence was deafening, and we stood together bruised, battered, but unbroken. Humanity had survived. And in the ashes of this conflict, we had learned a lesson that would never be forgotten. When we come together, there is nothing we cannot overcome. The new beginning. Epilogue. As the dust settled, the world began to heal. With the help of the Arcturians, humanity advanced to new heights, harnessing the power of alien technology to create a better world. But we would never forget the lessons of the war. We had learned that humanity, though flawed and imperfect, was resilient. We had learned that together we could face anything, even an alien invasion. And perhaps, just perhaps, the universe would now look at us with respect, knowing that Earth was a planet not to be underestimated.